Okay, so let's take a step back for a minute and let's examine my argument. In many videos in the past, I've pointed out Professor Obi's book, Fighting for Honor, The History of African Martial Art Traditions in the Atlantic World. And at the end of this video, I'll post the pages that I refer to that prove my point. Page 162, okay? In the study of capoeiras in the second half of the 19th century suggests that even after the reduction of African-born populations, it was standard for each capoeira society to contain at least one African. So what was the fear? The fear was that the culture of the white man was going to overtake them. These people were the guys resisting, the main group of people resisting against the white man. And many of them were in capoeira brotherhoods. In fact, let's back up for a little bit. Let's go to the second paragraph on the page. These initiations took place in church towers away from the view of the uninitiated. The secrecy made them quite distinct from the public ceremonies of the Catholic brotherhoods or the inauguration of the chiefs of the cantos. So these guys were kind of compartmentalized blacks who, fought for what they believed in and were heavily influenced by Christianity. And many of them saw themselves as Christians just in capoeira societies. So let's go back, let's fast forward a bit, go back to where we were. Okay, so after the reduction of African-born populations, it was standard for each capoeira society to contain at least one African who normally held the office of society chief or at least the most experienced multi-member. The carrier of cultural memory, and that had an important role in the symbolic reproduction of the group. So we're not looking to Rome or Greece, so specifically let's look at the African spirituality. Not the Club of Rome, not some some secret society that started in Europe and this dresses like them and thinks like them and is friends with them. No, but an African spiritual system, okay? In addition to this possible cultural consideration, complete mastery of the martial arts system was also essential for the office of chief. So it's this system. It's not karate, it's not taekwondo. You can't come from outside and say, hey, I've mastered that system. You see what I'm saying? So this is my system. And there's other systems, and we compete with them ritually in the oldest martial arts tradition on the planet, the African tradition, and we'll get that to that in a moment. Okay? So complete mastery of the martial arts system was also essential for the office of chief, right? Because in certain situations, conflicts between societies were ritually resolved through single combat of their chiefs. Okay, so these are skills you need for actual combat. If you can't strike them sparring, you're probably not going to be able to kill them, right? And on page, let me just look at my notes real quickly. Basically on some page, okay, it's page 32 toward the beginning of the book, paragraph 4 and 5, it talks about sparring with soft leaves on sticks. Right, transferable skills for actual combat, and this is part of how you train to be the chief. It's not who has the best form, it's who has the best application, okay? And we'll get into the omenani later, or I'll just put a picture at the end. So bloodshed is taboo in Igbo culture, and African American culture is a mix of martial arts culture historically is a mix of Igbo, who had their martial arts, like Umba and Umba. You had the capoeiras, the Angolans, and people had their culture. And then you had the Congos, right? They walked around with knives. And anyone who didn't walk around with a knife should go, rear children, right? And the capoeiras had the navalas, and the Igbos had the dreaded four-bladed leopard knife. Okay, so the knife is emphasized in the African martial arts systems and the oldest systems on the planet, and you see that with the Ikenga knife, and you see that with Haru's, what you might describe as a knife or a short blade, right? So even it carries on, this idea of knife and martial arts carries on through Africa, through North Africa to the Fertile Crescent. It starts somewhere in Africa, pre-dynastic Africa, and it travels through the Fertile Crescent, this idea of martial arts, knife warfare, right? And so people's body types, as your ancestors did it logically, right? Whoever ancestors emphasized this kind of martial arts first, they would have the most athletic genes because they're bred to determine who's the best based on the martial arts scale that has to do with the applications of striking or percussive skills. That's why they focus on playing the drum and the bow, okay? And I'll put it at the end where capoeira is the paso, right? And it comes from the Bantu drum, I believe they call it, and the Angolan bow. Okay, this is the dancing to the African tune with African spiritual systems and African martial arts systems. And of course, every system on the planet has similar moves. You know, the Africans have the front kick incorporated in pretty much every one of their dances. It's obvious this front kick goes back to ancient African martial arts systems thousands and thousands of years ago. Okay? So the moves that I focus on aren't going to be these moves that are characteristic of other systems, but rather they're characteristics of the various angles the African, people who are interested in sacred geometry and building and fighting and archery, archery, working the angles. Obviously, working the angles is the basic fundamental principle of warfare. So I'm going to focus on these kind of natural principles, and through nature, and God inspired me through nature, the supernatural grace perfecting nature, as St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the major factors in Catholic philosophy would have said, I'm sure many of you can agree, the grace of God perfecting your nature, right? Not looking to technology to determine it, not looking to science, but looking to nature to determine naturally what is the ideal system, what is the ideal man, and how do we create that through a martial arts system or a spiritual system. Okay, so it goes on to say, above them, at least in the second half of the century, were the overlords. So to be a chief, you had to be someone who had comparable skills to mine. Okay, to be a factor in the spiritual process and experience of the African American community at the highest level, you had to be someone who's good at single combat, right? And then to be the chief of chiefs, okay? Above them, at least in the second half of the century, were the overlords or chiefs of chiefs. Positions attained only by the boldest among these chiefs, the most considerate and wise. Now, considerate is not just, considering people's feelings, but considering when to be harsh and offensive and when not to be. Considering everything, because remember, this is a martial arts perspective, not your blinder on American thinking inside the box, trying to adhere to social norms perspective, but a powerful, deep martial arts perspective from people who think about religion, right? Is there this other, dimension that exists, right? Is there more than meets the eye type of people who are trying to find that deeper level of reality, of existence, of truth, versus people who are stuck in social norms, right? So we are the people that think that way. We are the people that prove it. While everyone else, it's all speculation and science. So when you have these people who couldn't fight as well as the African martial artists, whether they were Semitic Egyptians, from the northern Egypt, or black-ass southern Egyptians and Nubians, they couldn't fight as well as us, so their argument changed. They came in with armor and said, let's value the science that gave us this armor, the thinkers who thought the way that gave us this armor, and not the natural thinking of African culture that spread across the Middle East. If you get what I'm saying. I don't see how you could miss my point, but I'll rephrase it at the end in case you need me to. Okay, it goes on to say, secret societies, in the last paragraph, are defined by esoteric knowledge, right? Going back to the beginning. The beginning of what? White supremacy? Civilization? Or what about the foundation of civilization, the indigenous peoples of Africa and their martial arts systems, right? No, they stopped before that. Why? Because they don't want to consider what the black man says. They don't want to analyze the black man's culture. They want the black man looking at, white, say you look at Egypt, right? They want you to take the perspective the Greek would have taken if he had lived in Egypt, or the Berber, or someone like them. They don't want you to look at it as the African martial artist living in Egypt, or the black African martial artist in Egypt, or the sub-Saharan view of it. Okay, so Egypt is where all these views meet and civilization started. And they want you to see it the way that their cults, the people who have cults that think like them, that are more like them, the Apis guys, right? The people with Greco-Egyptian cultures think, and not the people with true sub-Saharan Egyptian, if you will, black Egyptian culture would have seen it. The people who really started this shit. And the proof is in the pudding. We were bred to be martial artists. We don't have a basketball build because we were bred to be basketball players for thousands of years. We have a build that's superior for maneuverability, dexterity, precision, agility. These are the skills for martial artists. And when it comes to the priesthood, I mean, they were initiated in the fucking church for the love of God. You know? You think it has no spiritual significance? This is the spiritual continuity of the religious priesthood of the African community. And it continued through bondage. So the main problem with Europeans' perceptions of Christianity, for example, isn't, oh, it's bad to women and blah, blah, blah. That's our culture anyway. We put women in their fucking place and we're not bad to them. That is their perception of how they're being treated, not ours. We have a patriarchal culture led by an African spiritual priesthood of deep thinkers who carry the esoteric knowledge in their being. Not as much as sissies, effeminate people, whoever they may be, whatever their sexual orientation may be, or any other kind of pussy that doesn't know God. For example, the Kalunga, page 39. Ka is a prefix often used for people or offices reflecting the fact that they conceived of Kalunga as a singular personalized God. Beyond directly signifying the great bringer of order, Kalunga also referred to the cosmological order that God had created. So there's this divine order, whether or not you have the church in the African community. And it is an African martial arts order. And historically and traditionally, I am at the top. So don't think for 1 second that that has escaped me. A people's ability to free themselves from their enemies and to do the work of God partially depends on their ability to organize themselves unhindered and uncontrolled by other groups of people who seek to control their philosophy, be they secret societies within their own race or ethnic group, or be they colonialists or neo-colonialists. Part of the reason why the closed fist wasn't incorporated into many of the capoeira techniques was because you had to work the field. You know, these martial artists didn't just get, to play all day and do martial arts. They had to work. So they didn't want to hurt their hands, fighting each other all the time. So there's a cultural consideration that also goes back to Africa. It's the same thing. Naturally, that was a consideration. So even boxing and wrestling, this is the evolution of these things from the perspective of the corrupt man, the rich man, the spoiled man, doesn't have to worry about working, right? Can you get beat up after a UFC fight and go to work the next day? So it's part of the culture of, people who don't live a balanced moral life. And that's what it spreads, So on so many levels, my way is preferable. Stop reaching out to the whites who are colonialists, who are always the first to interact with blacks in secret societies, especially. And start listening to the man who's walking in the light. No matter what they say, I challenge them in a way that they all got clearly and heard loud and clear. I am the top. End of story.